Hello, everyone. This is Philosophy of the People with Ben Burgess and Stefan Bertram. And this week we're talking about Ayn Rand and the movie Midsommar and dipping in once again, as we did with the Zizek video, into being React YouTubers.
Yeah. Ideally, the best way to use the medium of YouTube is by reacting to somebody reacting to you. But if that's not available, first order one's okay too.
We can get there eventually. Ben, is Helen Keller real? Like, was that a real thing?
Yes. Helen Keller's a real person. Yes.
But did she really learn? Because it seems really, I can't really imagine how it happened.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a genuinely incredible story. But the reason that this comes up, just to give people a light sprinkling of context, is that apparently one of Ayn Rand's favorite movies is The Miracle Worker, which is about Helen Keller, who is this this deaf mute, blind woman who like just in a fairly miraculous way learned to interact with the world, and she
was the first person to just chat it out.
Could read and write eventually, and all this stuff, right? And so it's a very you can see why Rand was into this, right? Because this is all about sort of the like willpower, right? You're overcoming obstacles that you're taught to do this amazing thing. But the sort of thing I noted in passing is that I don't know how much Rand knows about Helen Keller's subsequent life, because there's a whole lot there that she wouldn't like. That having become able to having been able to she wasn't mute, but she was blind and deaf, right? That's it. Anyway, having been able to learn to read, to interact with the world, everything, she became an adamant socialist. She
became a socialist because she's basically the only person in the world who actually experienced Rawls's original position.
Yeah.
Because she's the only person in the world for who the veil on the world was lifted as an adult.
Yeah. I mean, I guess in the Rawls case, there's also, you don't know all the first person stuff, but you do know everything else. But yeah, right. So she was a socialist. She was a wobbly, right? A member of the Industrial Workers of the World, this militant anti-capitalist labor union. She was a strong supporter of the Bolshevik Revolution. So, it's just a little bit funny that when I was kind of trying to look for information about Ayn Rand's taste in movies, that there's this objectivist website that said that The Miracle Worker about Helen Keller was her favorite movie, because I've got to think all that would have soured it for her a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. But a movie she wouldn't like, we think, and I'm convinced, unless, I think the only way she wouldn't if is if she kind of just missed the point.
Yeah. Is Midsommar. Yeah. So we'll definitely get to that. But it's, yeah. So I was thinking about Midsommar, because I actually just recently went. I saw Midsommar twice when it was in the theaters when it first came out, but not since then. And I was thinking about it because I finally got around to watching something I hadn't seen before ever, which is the Wicker Man. I actually watched both versions of it, and the 2006 one is just awful. I've only ever I'd only ever seen the 20 seconds about the bees before last weekend, but the original 1973 one is great. And of course, it's a pretty obvious, pretty acknowledged influence on Midsommar, right? Like Midsommar even has somebody in a bear suit, which which seems like a pretty clear nod to Wicker Man. And watching the movie got me thinking about it, and I looked up some video essays on YouTube, as you do, about Midsommar to see what people have been saying about it in the years since it came out. Uh, and it and it occurred to me as I was watching it, and as I was watching one of these video essays in particular, that Ayn Rand, would have hated this movie, and the thing that she would have hated it for also speaks to why it's a good movie. And so yeah, to kind of build up to that case, right? I start talking about what kind of little I can tell about Rand's views towards movies, which seem to be very heavily ideological. That I don't. If she expressed any purely aesthetic movie opinions, I don't know about them. But everything that I've been able to find is like her favorite movie is The Miracle Worker, because she's always, if you read her
She
essay,
worked a miracle.
yeah, she's always going on about how these ridiculous people who say that, like, they didn't make the world, and like they're not responsible for conditions around them, when really they should, really they should be like heroic strivers who worked their will on it, so you can see why she liked that. Conversely, apparently she thought that It's a Wonderful Life was communist propaganda because it demonized bankers. So, that gives you some sense of things. But, that just establishes that she had these very strong ideological reactions to movies. But to really get to why I think that she would have had the ideological reaction to this particular movie that she did, before we even get to what happens in Midsommar, it's probably worth taking a minute to kind of unpack what she thought, right? Like what the Ayn Rand worldview is. Since basically my sense of this is that a lot of people do have like a slightly caricatured idea of what it was, but honestly, the real thing isn't much better than the caricature. So, she makes a big deal about saying that, her philosophy is called objectivism. And so it's all about something objective reality, something. But I'm pretty skeptical that she honestly knows enough about the sort of interestingly debatable issues about metaphysics or epistemology to like even succeed in saying anything controversial enough.
It's funny that she was kind of emphasizing her belief in objective reality before even like the big dramas of relativism and postmodernism and so on in like half of the 20th century.
Uh,
She was a farcier in her own weird way.
yeah, right. Like who was the opponent, right?
Yeah, I
Who
mean, she was
doesn't?
fighting, fighting a right wing war against like I mean, they're currently fighting a right wing war against a straw man, but she was fighting it before they'd even built the straw man.
Yeah, that is actually that is actually kind of interesting. Because yeah, I mean, like that is an interesting question, right? Who's the opponent? Like she really hated she really hated Kant, right? She was massively ahead of the curve on that one. I've seen right wingers talk about Kant as like the source of wokeness or whatever a couple of times in recent
Well, she
years.
she
But
gave birth to this whole thing that where you can like track social evilness in like a line from Plato to Kant.
yeah, right. which is interesting because Aristotle is basically the only historical philosopher that she actually likes. Um, so, I guess the
Someone
quick.
asked on Reddit asked philosophy once if this rap was a good history of philosophy, and it was an objectivist rapper who was, tracing the lineage of Aristotle the based and Plato the cringe.
Okay, well, you got to send that over because that feels like something I have to play on the show. but
It was a long time ago. I can probably find it.
um, but yeah, so the fact that like Kant thinks that in a certain sense, we don't have epistemic access to the things in themselves, right? Like is something she makes a big deal of hating. She, her understanding of of like dialectical materialism is certainly a big enemy there because she thinks they deny that A is A. And so there's something there about objective reality. But yeah, you would think that there would be this big like pool of objective reality deniers
Yeah,
who should be setting herself up in opposition to. And it's really that is very strange, right? But it's like really like certainly at least as a first pass at that stuff. And if certainly I actually read or reread a bunch of her essays to write this, so I have to take a little break. But if somebody if anybody thinks that I'm missing something more interesting she said about these subjects, I'm prepared to read like one or two more of these essays in like a month. So so email me then. But like certainly if you go to like the Ayn Rand Encyclopedia online, which is this sort of assembly of quotes from her on different subjects in alphabetical order, lovingly arranged by her disciples, and you read the ones on epistemology and metaphysics in there, I mean, there's just nothing there. I mean, like that. It's just she says, basically she says, yeah, objective reality exists, and we could know some stuff about it, right? And congratulations, Ein. That was a very brave stand that you took by saying that. But I'm fairly sure that the pretty crushingly overwhelming majority of people who've ever lived have thought both of those things. Included a smaller majority, granted, but still a majority of people who've written about philosophy have thought both of those things, and it's just not that interesting, right? Like very little that's sort of controversial follows from any of that, right? So I think my possibly uncharitable gloss on this is that by and large, the objective reality is real, A is A stuff. Oh yeah, everything's identical to itself. That's also another.
I did say base when I read that.
It's another important Ayn Rand insight, and I'd say in the essay, it's like the amazing thing about all this is that she just every time she's talking about what like analytic philosophers would call M&E, right, metaphysics and epistemology. Every time she touches on these subjects, like just the tone really makes it sound like she's gone into the main square of the capital city of a totalitarian dictatorship to like take out a bullhorn and tell the truth about the leader until some, men in black swoop in and take her away or maybe shoot her where she stands. But like
holding up a sign
all
saying
she's
2 + 2 is 4.
Yeah, all she's saying is that stuff is identical to itself. Objective reality is real. We can know stuff about it. It's like, yeah, okay. I really don't think that's as controversial as you think it is. But putting all that aside, in fact, I think that I think that there's like like she's making a big deal of like Aristotle pointing out many of these things, and who was like, even a lot of the people she would think of as her enemies were very, very appreciative of like Aristotle's writings about these things. People like Hegel and Engels and, Lenin, right? Has this is Chris Sciabara, I think is how you pronounce his last name, wrote a essay actually the day after this one came out that was responding to the dialectic stuff I'd done a while ago. And you know, he like assembles some of these quotes from these guys about Aristotle, which is why it's in my head. But in any case, my general suspicion is that the M&E, right, the non-normative philosophy in Ayn Rand is pretty much just window dressing. It's there to sort of help lend this sort of aura of profundity to what she actually cares about,
Oh, yeah, and I
which
guess
is the
lend an aura of being
yeah,
like the only straight talker
yeah,
against the
exactly, right.
hypothetical enemy.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. That it's like everybody else, right? Other than like Aristotle and her, everybody else is trying to sell you some kind of fantastical bullshit that, detaches from objective reality. But, she's here to recognize the obvious truths. And there's some vague implication that once you recognize those obvious truths, you have to agree with the moral political philosophy for some reason. She's very down on Hume for saying that there's a gap between facts and values, although like just about everybody else who's very down on this, she doesn't really have a coherent objection to that point. But yeah, I mean the normative stuff is really where the Ayn Rand action is, because look, I mean, credit where credit's due. That's at least where she's saying things that are interesting enough to be controversial.
Yeah, she
Um,
really is fighting the world on these points.
yeah, exactly. and, and and so if you read this stuff, so like there's like a short collection of her essay. I mean, a lot of this is presented through the novels. She's the kind of novelist who there's never the slightest doubt about who's speaking Ayn Rand's thoughts in the novel. So really you can just read those. But she has this pretty thin essay collection called The Virtue of Selfishness. Uh, that I'd read some of before, and I went back and read a bunch of it to write this. And in there, I mean, the title says it all, right? But she's on one level very concerned I mean, she wants it a couple of different ways, right? She enjoys the shock value of that phrase, the virtue of selfishness, and she likes the sort of reaction that people have to it, right? She wants them to have that reaction, right? It's a little bit like, so it's like, given that, like the sort of complaining about people interpreting in the obvious way, it always feels a little bit like, I don't know, like if you're an Anton LaVey kind of Satanist, and and you're always like, oh, see, people think we worship the devil. It's like, yeah, it's because you call yourself a Satanist. Like, if you didn't want people to think that, you should have picked a different name. Like, what do you expect? So there is a little bit of that, but I also think there's some genuine ambiguity in her view, right? Since she has a sort of way of distancing what she thinks from what that phrase suggests, but also at the end of the day, how much distance is there really? Right?
I mean,
Like,
from the things you say, she keeps nearly just being like a straight Aristotelian.
yeah, exactly. So I mentioned Roderick Long, who's somebody who, unlike Ayn Rand, actually does know a bunch of stuff about the history of philosophy, but who has a vastly more charitable reading of Rand than I do. And he talks about how there's this kind of like Rand's notion of selfishness is ambiguous, and it has what he calls, there's like a sort of Hobbesian side to it and an Aristotelian side to it. In other words, there's an aspect to it that really kind of is what it sounds like, but then like there's an aspect to it where like basically whenever she wants to run away from what it sounds like, sort of gets very Aristotelian, is very like, well, the sort of the real, somebody's just like robbing and and raping and pillaging, then they have like a irrational understanding of what the good life is, and so they're not actually being self-interested because they're not rational enough to understand what their true
Because they're
interests
doing things
are.
I don't like.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, this is the part where it does actually get somewhat Aristotelian, that she certainly thinks that the sort of a genuinely good life is about sort of creative activity and this kind of more admirable kind of sense of self-realization. um but at the end of the day, like, even once you sort of move away from the more caricatured stuff, other people still kind of don't count,
Right.
right? Like, it's other people's interests just don't need to be taken into account, like, on their own account, right? Like, they sort of, um if you might have some reason why particular other people matter to you, or at her, at the moments where she edges closest to acknowledging sort of any kind of normal notion of moral responsibility to other people, maybe all other people matter a little bit, and we could do some wordplay to show why that's actually selfish, but like, that like does verge on social contract stuff. But but basically, she really doesn't think that they count. So like, I don't know, years ago, actually one of the first episodes of my show, certainly within like the first dozen or so, I think, I did a debate with this guy, Euron Brook, who's, I think, is or was the chairman of the board of the Ayn Rand Institute, and he certainly embraced that, like, quite explicitly. So, and like the example, you know, um, the example that I think draws it out nicely is, it's like, okay, look, you can, yeah, if you're just like stealing and raping and all that, then that's not the sort of properly understood rational self-interest. And there are points where she really does seem to want to sneak in some libertarian property rights that really do seem like obligations to other people. But if you know yeah, you should, like, you should develop your own talents and capacities, and sort of pursue greatness. She's very, like, one of her examples in one of these essays is about, like, somebody, like a young man, who she's almost always, it's always men in Rand's examples, for whatever reason. A young man who doesn't pursue the career that he's really going to be good at, because he's going to go into the family business to please his parents, right? That's bad, right? Because you're not developing your potential. But, like, look, if we put if we did like a 1% tax on the highest incomes, to in order to pay for everybody to go to college, so everybody could develop their talents, etc., like, that's something. I actually brought that up to your own Brooke, and that's like the kind of thing that sort of, I think, like, very quickly draws out that's like, no, other people really seriously do not fucking matter, right? Like, she has, like, one of the examples where she's trying to do her gymnastics to show that, that this is the sort of brute beast that people think of when they hear phrases like the virtue of selfishness, that's not it. Is that a man who might, like, spend all the money he has in the world to save the life of the woman he loves, because he knows he'll, or maybe even die in the process, right? Because he knows he's not gonna, and that's okay, right? That's actually acceptably selfish because he knows that he'll be so miserable if she dies that that makes it like worth it to him. But she explicitly says, look, this is, and don't we admire this man more than somebody who would be doing the, actually unselfish thing, which is using the same amount of money to save, several other women who don't mean anything to him.
Like, not really.
and just the idea that's like, okay, but like we could, follow me here. We could just like collect some money from this man and every other man and woman, through taxation.
At
And
gunpoint, though, Ben, that's bad.
We could just have a healthcare
You're
system
doing this to rich people.
Yes, exactly. And that's, and yeah, and so it's like ultimately, she's, and she even, I don't know, she's very weird on like whether we ever really have, it's ever like good or virtuous to like help random people. She sort of wants to have it both ways on, because it's like, look, if there's an emergency going on, like somebody's, about to burn to death or something, then maybe, right?
Yeah, I mean,
It's
kind
good.
of like it's strange that if her only thing is kind of self-fulfillment, then it can't really be the case that she doesn't just say, do what you will. It must
Yeah.
have a very particular idea of like the correct subject that all persons ought to be willing towards.
Yeah, right. So the fact that she's not willing to say do what you will, that's the whole of the law, is the only reason she's not saying that, given everything else she says, is that she thinks that people can just be wrong. I mean, about what their interests are. That like that it's. I mean, I guess this is the thing that like, maybe. I think when she goes on and on about objective reality, it's like to the extent that she's talking about like the external world existing, which is the way she presents it a lot of times, then it's very boring because everybody thinks that. But I think oftentimes there's like this slippage that she's sort of getting that like, oh, this thing would be obviously silly to deny. And really what she's building in is, oh, here's some other objective facts that there are, here's what's like objectively in your interests. And you're just wrong, right? If you don't think so, you're not being rational if you don't think so, which is why, she has this like maxim about how the interests of rational men never come into conflict, which I remember in Corey Robin's book, The Reactionary Mind.
Surely that happens in business like a billion times a day.
Yeah, right, exactly, right. So, so it seems nutty to say that that's not the case. And she has a lot of moves that she makes to sort of try to wiggle out of this. That but I think that what it really amounts to is that every time we encounter an obvious, counterexample, we just like ascend to a higher level of abstraction. So we're not thinking about the concrete case where it clearly does happen. Yeah, like I remember, the Corey Robin line about this is that this is just sort of this is like the Rand equivalent of like a statement of faith and providence, right? That it's just all going to work out for some strange reason. So all of which is to say that Rand wants to, she, even though I think she is a bit conflicted and she's not willing to go full Aleister Crowley about it, but she, so she does have this kind of escape hatch strategy of like when it starts to feel a little too monstrous, right? You go, you lean into the Aristotelian side of her views and how people can be mistaken about their self-interest, but also basically fucking It's a Wonderful Life is like too much because of the altruism, right? Like that's the you basically think like, and even as conflicted as she is about, like, she's sort of a little slippery about whether you even, whether it's even like good and virtuous to like save people from burning buildings. And she says, yeah, that might be okay. And she has all these reasons to think that that might be a good thing to do. But she's also very clear that just like poverty isn't on that list, right? That that you shouldn't be spending your life, trying to help those people, right? So she does want not just the shock value of saying that selfishness is virtue and all of that, but that she genuinely does want to like draw all sorts of controversial moral and political conclusions from this, right? That that you should, that it's good and proper that basically all all you care about is your own individual fulfillment. And sure, we can put some constraints on what counts as individual fulfillment, but a lot of her examples are driven by a very like intuitive, common sense kind of idea of what individual fulfillment would be. That it's all about that that the sort of like, that you're sort of living up to your potential, you're living the best version of your life, right? So all of that, I think, puts enough in place that that we can kind of get to, I saw you said in the description on YouTube for this video that this was going to be an episode about white women. So one of those is Ayn Rand, but the other one is Danny and Midsommar. So, how do you want to do this?
I did find the Objectivist History of Philosophy rap, by the way, if you want to play that at the end of the show.
Oh my God, yes. Let's definitely play that at the end of the show.
I mean, do you want to just introduce kind of the framing of this video essay just for like a minute, and then we can play the two kind of bits.
Yeah, that sounds good. So, yeah, look, anybody who didn't see Midsommar or it's been a very long time. It's it's a movie about the main character Danny goes through this awful traumatic experience at the beginning of the movie. Her like disturbed sister does a murder suicide thing with her parents. It's a really bleak beginning. And then she ends up going along with her boyfriend who was about to break up, who was like getting close to the point of breaking up with her when this happened. But of course he can't, like he's not going to break up with her right as she's going through this like awful, unreal trauma and she ends up going, she ends up kind of tagging along with him and his grad school buddies, and anybody who's it's a person who went to graduate school. It made it interesting to watch because there are some recognizable people here, but he gets up, and these are all, not flattering portrayals of what these people are like. And so she ends up, tagging along with her boyfriend and his grad school buddies to go to Sweden, where one of them's, comes from this sort of hippie neo-pagan compound where commune kind of place where he grew up, and the grad students are like anthropologists, so this is going to be really interesting for them to study it. And wouldn't you know, it turns out to be a murderous cult. And by the end of the movie, and I think some of what we'll watch, we're going to get a much more fine-grained description of it than this, right? But it's like basically by the end of the movie, Danny is assimilated into the cult, and it's not just a sort of like glassy-eyed loss of her perspective or whatever. This is actually played in a pretty convincing way in the movie as personal fulfillment, that she's gone through this awful thing, and she really needs family, and this provides family, and she's also using them as a way of settling accounts in her own life. And so the part of the video essays, this is from the Terraformed YouTube channel, and it's called something like "Where Midsommar Discourse Goes Wrong" or "What It Misses" or something like that. And so the part that we're not going to watch, there's a lot about how yeah, I feel bad. Guy says I got to rent this movie. If you want to pause this video, will still be there.
Yeah. Don't stop watching. It's fine. It's fine to go off us.
Yeah, exactly. But
he
the part of the video
identifies in this video essay that a lot of kind of online critique, or barely counts as critique, kind of engages with these movies to be like, was she right to do this?
Yeah, exactly. And so yeah, in other words, there's like a certain kind of movie discourse that's become very popular in the last decade or two, especially, and whatever, I'm sure has always existed in one way or another, but I think I think is sort of inescapable now. It's all over the place, that that kind of reads every movie as a very straightforward morality tale where you're supposed to root for the people who are completely right and have
did she snap when she murdered
exactly
sacrificed her boyfriend?
Boo and hiss at the people who are completely bad, and that's the level at which your reaction should take place. So the way that plays out with regard to Midsommar is that it's either Yas Queen, that this is wonderful,
slay,
it's so good
in very literal terms.
Yeah, very literally slay, right? It's good that you use the murder cult to kill your boyfriend.
Grad students on people anyway.
Yeah, that's a wonderful thing. That's admirable. Or oh my God, she's terrible. There's no sense in which what's going on here is a happy ending for her, because it would be troubling to hold two thoughts in your head at the same time. And we can't have that. And so in what we're going to watch, the two, it's longer than what we're willing to watch right now, but you should watch the whole thing. It's embedded in the essay. It's a fun video, but I think we're going to watch first some, what they do is they basically say, look, and this I totally agree with. We're going to get to the disagreement in a moment, but right, this I totally agree with. They say, hey, maybe stories are more complicated than you guys seem to think. Maybe in fact some of the power of this story comes from the fact that a couple of different things that it's fair to have different reactions to are going on at the same time. So yeah, we're going to watch the first few minutes of the section called "One Way of Looking at It."
Midsommar is presented through Danny's protagonized perspective. We'll start by observing through her lens. The very first image we're shown pretty blatantly transmits to us the story that's about to unfold for Danny. And like the tone of the movie itself, it has a fairy tale veneer to it. The princess chained down by a dark and tragic fate, only to be ultimately released and replenished by the good people of a bright and shiny faraway land. And this showing of the tracks and the destination before the train has even left the station yet ties into a little theme we discussed in my last video on Beau is Afraid, a movie that also came from the totally stable mind of a fun-loving family man named Ari Aster. Out of the 3 movies he's written and directed thus far, Hereditary, Midsommar, and Beau is Afraid, each one expresses, in some way or another, the philosophy of determinism. The idea that human beings don't really possess the agency and free will they may think they possess. But unlike Hereditary and Beau, it's far more debatable if the outside forces guiding our protagonist's path are a net positive or a net negative for her overall well-being. Because unlike her unlucky group of so-called friends, Dani reaches her endpoint alive and seemingly happier than ever. And since we're committing to this whole flower princess fairy tale perspective, let's roll with it. Because as the movie begins by steeping us into Dani's depression.
So that's the one way to look at it, which is her from the tight point of view of Dani.
Yeah, and if you watch the whole thing, they do a good job of going through like the sort of detailed events of the movie and showing how things look from that point of view, and how if you are, you know, very tightly in her point of view, is this actually is a story of self-fulfillment.
It's a happy story, bro, with a happy ending.
Yeah, exactly. And doesn't sound like it, but they make a good case in those 10 minutes. So now we're going to do another way of looking at it.
Back from our emotional connection to Dani and taking a more logical look with a healthy dose of basic morality, the Harga come off less like happy fairy folk Dani saviors and more like deranged whack job Dani brainwashers. There's a difference. And the latter may earn them the reward for most casually fucked up horror villains in recent memory. From this perspective, the Harga may have conveniently triggered Dani to recognize her trauma and unaddressed needs, but their so-called healing through the witnessing and integrating of death comes off more like an excuse for some serious sadism. They're less healing Dani of that dark poison inside of her and more showing her how to become one with its sickness and therefore one with them. Display it proudly in the light rather than flush it out with the light. You lost your sister and parents to a horrific death. So let us show you how to make death and mutilation as mundane as taking out the trash. This is sure to...
Yeah. So, again, we're only getting very small snippets here, but everything that is in the one way to look at it section of the video, I think it's like, yeah, that's correct, right? That is how the movie is portraying Dani's perspective on this stuff. It all makes its own sort of sense. And by and large, everything in the another way to look at it section is also right? That like, as they say, from a more detached logical point of view, this is a evil death cult, and
I mean,
it's bad.
It was actually interesting because in at least that clip, the way the video essay person was framing it, it was also seemingly in terms of her kind of fulfillment not being a true fulfillment.
And that's where I get off the bus, because in fact, in the first bit we watched, right, they, you know, the way that they framed the difference between the different perspectives, they used the phrase overall well-being, and said, no comment.
It's not even that ball, so.
Yeah. You know, they used the phrase overall well-being and said the difference between these two perspectives was about how the events of the movie, like, sort of, you know, like whether this was a positive in terms of her overall well-being. And then you see in the snippet we watched of the second perspective that it's all about, they keep saying, well, okay, so they're showing the trauma and unaddressed issues, and it seems like there's healing, but it's not really healing. And as I was watching it, and, you know, and even though, again, at the right level of abstraction, I completely agree with their point that there is that the sort of that there are two things going on here that it's natural to have very different reactions to, and in fact, a lot of the power and creepiness of this as a, you know, high-end folk horror flick comes from the way those two are clashing in your head as a viewer. I think that's totally right. But what my frustration came from as I was watching it was that it's like that whole framing. It's like, look, is her overall well-being the only question here?
Right.
Right? Is that the only issue? Like, does it have to be the case that she's not really healed? In terms of her own internal psychological drama.
Yeah, like it
For
thinks he's like with an injection of basic morality, but then doesn't go on to say murder is bad, but goes on to say a cult is brainwashing you into thinking that murder is good, or something like this, as if that's the problem, as opposed to the actual things which are happening.
yeah, exactly. Right. It's like I think that it could be like the thing that they're assuming is in there is this very Ayn Randish conflation of individual well-being with morality. This is that, like, you living your best life, your overall well-being is the same question as like what it's morally virtuous for you to do. And like, look, it's nice when those two things coincide, but there's no like metaphysical guarantee that they always have to. I don't doubt for a moment, right? You think about all of the
Right, and I mean, unless you believe this Randian thing that rational men never clash or whatever, even if it's always good to be self-fulfilled, it's going to be the case at least some of the time that different people are going to come into conflict about this self-fulfillment.
Yeah, I think that like this is a really nice, vivid example of why that assumption is wrong. Because again, everything in that 10 minutes that we played, like the first minute of one way to look at it, right? That part of the video is correct, right? I think that the movie is vividly portraying a set of circumstances in which joining an evil cult and using it to murder somebody would actually be good for your individual well-being. But without the assumption that your individual well-being is the beginning and end of morality, I'm not, there's nothing, we don't need to, we could just say like, yes, even if you actually are being healed, it's not false healing, it's not whatever, you are genuinely being healed of what ails you. Given that you are not the only person who matters, and everybody else's interests count too, what you're doing could still be very, very, very bad.
Right?
Like
there's not a lot of healing otherwise in the film.
Yeah, I mean this isn't, and that's not like that's all compatible. I mean, if you think about, like, look, I have no doubt whatsoever that if you think about, if you think about all of the like militaries that have been used to wage unjust wars and committed terrible war crimes or whatever, look, there are lots of people whose own story of like joining the military and being in the, like that they have is in fact a story of self-fulfillment. There are people who, get like PTSD and it destroys their lives and everything, but not everybody, right? Some people actually do. It's like the U.S. Army recruitment commercial slogan, be all that you can be, right? There are people for whom that is actually their experience. And they actually do grow as people, the camaraderie with their fellow soldiers and the courage.
I very much want to try and avoid framing my war experience in these terms, despite the fact that it was literally very true.
Yeah, right, of course, right? And it's like, look, you were lucky enough to actually be on the right side, but like there's no reason why there's
I could have been on the right side and ended up very unfulfilled.
Yes, you could have been on the right side and had a set of experiences such that like it destroyed you. You also could have been on the wrong side, and given that you had the right attitudes, etc., right? Like you could have similarly had that kind of subjective experience of the whole thing. That there's not, and it's not. It seems entirely possible that that there. I don't doubt for a moment that like there are soldiers in the Wehrmacht, right?
Yeah, I
Who
mean
had
that's why I always thought with like kind of self-fulfillment based philosophy, I always just imagine like a panzer division driving across the steppe, and those guys must have been having like so much fun. They must have felt like gods and kings, but they were doing the worst thing that's ever happened.
yeah, but like, look, it could be that I mean, I'm sure that there are so many soldiers in the Wehrmacht. I'm sure you could find some who we could tell a compelling and accurate story about their lives that was all about the traumas they'd had before the war and the fears that they had to overcome, and they
And I mean,
uh
lots of these books do exist, unfortunately.
yeah, fair enough. That's okay. Yeah. So like, and I'm sure there are lots of them that tell accurate individual stories, that there are people for whom uh serving in the in the military of the like the most evil regime, I think relative to the time that it existed, that's ever been, right? Was in fact an amazing experience that was good for their
I
well-being.
mean,
And
I
we
mean,
could,
Junger, the philosopher, talks about his self-fulfillment in World War One, which might have been the
yeah,
least, on average, self-fulfilling war ever.
but all those millions of soldiers, there's bound to be some who come out of it that way. Yeah, so we could, if you really wanted to, you could make a move here where you really insisted that no, that's not that doesn't really serve. Oh my God, yeah, no, there are. I'm actually, I went for the Nazis just out of laziness, because they're the sort of automatic go-to consensus example of very evil, right? But like, to be honest, when I was saying it, what I was immediately thinking of is like clips that I've seen of like soldiers in Gaza, like celebrating together, and and all this stuff since the war started. Um, and yeah, like you could, if you wanted, tell a story about this where you sort of conceptually massaged everything, show that no, that the happy Nazi who's experienced breakthroughs and gotten over his trauma and felt fulfillment in the courage and camaraderie, that doesn't count as real well-being
Right.
on an individual level. And I'm sure you could like find ways to massage things to like make that story work. But honestly, it seems to me a lot more honest and plausible to just say, yeah, sure, maybe sometimes that is good for you as an individual. But since you're not the only individual in the universe who matters, it doesn't follow from it it's good for you as an individual, that it's good morally to serve in the Wehrmacht or to join the Harga death cult in Midsommar or any of these things, right? We should be able to separate out these questions. And I think the sort of core point that was being made in the Terraformed essay can be reformulated along those lines, and they're still right? In fact, it's made much more smoothly. It's like, look, from a tight Danny POV where all we're interested in is her individual well-being, this is a happy story. From a more detached perspective, with, as they say, an injection of basic morality, this is a very grim story, right? And in fact, I think a lot of what makes it emotionally effective, a lot of what makes Midsommar an unsettling movie to watch, is precisely the clash of these two facts, that you are very tightly ensconced in this point of view from which, solipsistically, this is a great story, but also you are a person and you weren't raised in the Harga death cult. And so you correctly recognize as you're watching that what you're seeing is evil and horrified. And the clash between those two reactions, because of course individual self-fulfillment is something we care about, something we should care about, but also it's not the only thing we care about, and not being monstrously evil is something that we value too. And I think the clash of those values is what makes the movie work. And I think to kind of, I think the whole, what the movie is really vividly demonstrating is precisely the fact that individual well-being and objective morality do not necessarily always row in the same direction, which is the thing that Ayn Rand's entire worldview is premised on not conceding. And so I think anybody with a good enough antenna for messages in movies that diverge from a worldview to detect It's a Wonderful Life as communist propaganda would have been very displeased with Midsommar. And, I also think that speaks to why it's a good movie.
It's also really funny that it's set in Sweden.
Yes.
And not even like, they didn't even set it in like the far north of Sweden or anything. It's like in the middle. Like, as if there could be like an open air murder suicide cult in just the middle of Sweden.
Yeah, the fact that this flies under the radar of the Swedish authorities is really something.
I mean, Wicker Man. Was it set in England? Was it set like on the Isle of Man or something weird?
Yeah. So
because England is the only country where it's less plausible. Like every inch of England is like managed.
Yeah. So it's set in the original Wicker Man is set in an island, Summer Isle, and I think it's a little unclear to me what the status of the island is, because it's definitely under the jurisdiction of the UK.
Yeah, it's some relation to the UK. It's in the British Isles.
Yeah, because like a big part of the creepiness
that right or something. The main character.
Yeah, exactly. So the cop who's the protagonist
just being the Hebrides
is a big part of this sort of creepiness of that movie is that like he keeps on being like, okay, you have to show me such and such, and people will be like, oh, well, we're gonna need to talk to Lord Summerisle about that. It's like, I'm a policeman, you have to, right? Like, because it's just uncomprehended.
The 2006 one was, I didn't realize they put it in America.
They did, yeah. And it's one of the ways that it ended up making less sense than the original, because in I mean, I don't know a tremendous amount about how policing works in the UK, but like I was prepared to believe, at least as I was watching it, that like whatever it was exactly that he worked for had jurisdiction over this island, whereas like in America,
we do have I think we have at least one feudal island still, the Isle of Sark.
Whereas like in America, policing is so localized that it's like, in fact, there are actually, a couple of lines of dialogue where people just say, dude, jurisdiction, what are you doing? Right. That's, that's a good point. Right. Like, but it's also a weird movie because, okay. At least a third of the dialogue in the 2006 Wicker Man is taken straight from the British original, and some of it makes a lot less sense 33 years later in an American context.
That's kind of beautiful. That's almost like some kind of performance art.
Like, there's a point
where Nick Cage be a 70s policeman, but British policeman, but he's in America, and it is the 2000s.
Yeah, right. Like there's a line where he refers to cemetery as a churchyard. It's like, an American cop in 2006 is going to call a cemetery a churchyard? That doesn't sound right.
Amazing.
And it's also just like a weird, I don't know. It's like a very low effort version of Wicker Man. They have, because one, it's a very, like there just seem to be so many fewer people on the island, and so it just makes it a lot less interesting than in the original. It's like overflowing with people who are, singing and, fucking in public and doing all these weird pagan rituals that like deeply offend the sensibilities of this, Christian policeman. Whereas here it's like pretty depopulated. It's like a skeleton crew of these women who are like mostly just kind of going about normal activities. And like occasionally there's something creepy and pagan that happens. And then but then like the really big thing, I mean, they change it from being sort of 70s free lovey to being sort of matriarchal. I don't know. They don't really explore it that much. But then like the biggest
what is
problem,
the political economy of Summer Isle?
Yeah, so we want to know, right? We actually kind of do know. They sell honey in that version, the bees, right? But also, like the big problem is that there's just nothing for the paganism to be in friction with in the 2006 version, because in the 1973 British one, the whole thing is that this guy is a very strung tight, devout Christian. And if Nicolas Cage's character has any religious beliefs, he never really brings them up. So it's like, I mean, he disapproves of human sacrifice, obviously, but like other than that, like I don't really think he's that like worked up one way or the other about how these ladies are living their lives. It's like this is just kind of so it like that the sort of main conflict in the original sort of doesn't. It's like this weird like. I guess now this really does sound like performance art, because it's like big chunks of the original movie are just sort of transposed without the rest of it, and it's just like I don't know.
It's like maybe those situationist films where they just redubbed things.
Yeah, the can dialectics break bricks, that kind of thing.
Have you seen Ex Machina?
I have. I like Ex Machina a lot.
I was just thinking about it because it's a film where she kills all the men. And it could be a Yas Queen story, but she doesn't do it. She doesn't really do it because they wronged her. That's not the point of what she does. She does it because it's kind of necessary.
Yeah. I actually, yeah, I have a, yeah, so I'm a big fan of Ex Machina. I think it's like a really nice combination of like it somehow manages to be this like big, exciting, very high concept science fiction movie, but also sort of like a one-act play. Like they're like
with three people in it. Yeah,
they're like basically three people who have speaking lines in the movie. I think that
they're all also like kind of marginal Anglos. Like none of the actors are from the UK, Canada, the United States, Australia.
Oh, interesting.
They're all like Irish or Guatemalan or something.
Yeah. No, it's so good. I like it so much. I actually have man, if we did want to turn in the direction of becoming reaction YouTubers,
I thought you were just going to say like film YouTubers.
Yeah, that's fine. We'll just do that. No, but I actually did watch a little while ago a video essay about Ex Machina that I really disagreed with. So you actually could do something there. It was by Sean Vids.
Oh right,
has an Ex Machina video.
Do you want to see this rap?
Of course I do. Before that, somebody in the chat asked about Kripke. Yeah, I had to read Kripke in grad school. I don't know that I have a lot of interested thoughts about Kripke, but I'll think about it. If I ever come up with one, I'll write an essay about it. Now, let's watch the rap.
I'm gonna let it kind of play the ancient bit and then pause and then do it that way, so we can commentate on the amazing discourse present.
Okay, sounds good. All right. Were you gonna do a screen share?
Oops, I forgot to do it. Sorry. I was just listening to everyone. I forgot that you guys need to participate too. Let's go again.
There we go.
School of
And then just sat here and watched the whole thing. then didn't say anything.
Asian. We're the first to philosophize. Unorganized Confucius, like Confucius, or the fat giggling Buddhist who said life is suffering. And through the centuries, suffering is all Asians did. But in Greece, intellectual chimpanzees were putting things in order. Thales put his banana down and said everything's water, which is dumb. But to tie it all together is what he tried. It's not water, it's fire, said the nigga Heraclitus. And that's the kind of shit that occupied the Athenais, tying everything together. It's called integration. Pythagoras said everything is numbers in a theorem. But there's more to life than numbers, so no one wanted to hear him. Zeno said there's no such thing as change. He got wrecked, but we know he invented the debate, or dialectic. When there was democracy, there was Democritus. He was wrong about some shit, but still they call him dad of science. Does the end justify the means? Thrasymachus said yeah. But tell that to someone dying for someone else's idea. And that's the fate of Socrates, convicted for corrupting little boys. And for democracy, he drank fucking poison. The boys in Socrates' class were mostly fake and gay though. But the first to build a system of philosophy was Plato. He said this world isn't real, but there's a world of forms where everything is perfect. He was fucking wrong, but they thought he was right, so his work was taught and saved. Ironically, which led the West back into a cave. But he paved the way for his student with the system model. Just the realest nigga ever to exist, Aristotle. He wanted explanation for the shit Plato told him, and he wrote it all down. Pound Plato like a clown. All the bullshit Plato said, Aristotle asked how. His metaphysics still hurts Plato's ass now. Aristotle wasn't perfect, but he gave us laws of logic, which gave us shit like PlayStation 1 and Apple Watches. All the cool shit you got, thank Aristotle's mother, which is more than...
So that's the real objectivist thesis from the start, that you should thank Aristotle for the fact that you have an iPhone.
Yeah, I was just wondering about the connection there. That's not obvious to me.
Because he invented science and rationalism and empiricism. Before Aristotle, no one had ever looked at the world to try and find out stuff.
Okay.
They were all just Platonists saying it wasn't real.
I see. Yeah, no, so that's, like to use a very Kripke example here, the possible world where Aristotle died, was like killed by a plague as a child. Like in the objectivist rap's point of view, in that world, we don't have iPhones.
We wouldn't be streaming then.
Okay. All right. Well, thank God.
We'd just be talking to each other.
Anybody did back when the words were uttered. Nobody gave a fuck. Yeah, fuck what he was saying. They was busy eating euros, wrestling naked, being gay. Like Epicurus told them, avoid all pain. The Stoics were like, nah, too much pleasure is vain. They said, be serious, focus on what you're doing. But they also pushed away the happiness worth pursuing. And the skeptic, ancient neck, beard, big towel. They said you can't know shit. Wrong then, gay now. As time passed, Plato's influence increased. Philo brought him to the Jews. Enter Christianity. Augustine cemented Plato to the West in written pages. Placing faith over reason, bringing in the Dark Ages. And poor Aristotle, dismissed in his day. No one gave a fuck about his gen.
So, one, this guy seems to be very concerned with who is gay, which is like one way, I suppose, of looking at the history of philosophy. But
I was going to say he's just doing it because he can't say the N-word, but I remember he did just say it.
No, he said the N-word like 5 times earlier. I mean, not the hard R, but even so. But also, is this like the more serious issue here? Is this a version of the history of philosophy where, like, the medievals didn't like Aristotle?
Well, it's kind of in this version, which is the Randian idea, no one liked him in antiquity and late antiquity until, well, it's coming on to now. Who revives Aristotle is the next verse.
Well, let's listen to just the next verse, but then I want to pause on this because this is odd.
And it was cast away and his fucking name forgotten by a world that shit on him until he was discovered by a Muslim? Al-Mamun translated him from Greek and began a golden era when religion let you think. But reason was rejected by this guy Al-Ghazali, which is probably why Islam today is not too fucking jolly.
So the Arabs brought him back for a little bit, and then they were based and cool, and then they turned into Hamas.
Because
Aristotle.
Aristotle. Yeah, that sounds plausible. I'm still very confused about how Plato taught the Christians and Muslims not to reason. That doesn't sound like Plato.
Yeah, I guess it's because you're not allowed to, in this fake version of Plato, you're not allowed to talk about the real world. And so then instead we understand the real world through faith in God.
Sure, why not?
It's fun that Ben's so shocked by this, but I've heard this bullshit history of philosophy so often by people online that it just doesn't faze me at all.
This is actually a little bit new to me. This is that, like, Plato of all people doesn't want you to reason. That's that seems very, very weird.
He decided to try to mix faith and reason was retarded, so he threw the precious work of Aristotle in the garbage. The enlightenment of the Arabs was over and departed, but in Europe, Tom Aquinas was like, I'm just getting started. He learned of Aristotle from this Jewish guy Maimonides, and he got it from a Muslim of Averroes. If ever these three religions found common ground, it's in placing reason over faith, living here and now. The sound of reason cut the silence of the Middle Ages, as pages filled with logic scrutinizing God himself. And the changes made some clergy nervous, but it was too late, cause the dumbest shit they ever did was let the artist paint. Human beauty was depicted, love and sex celebrated, life on earth is the standard, heaven could wait and shit. And though Christ was the one being painted, religion didn't know it was being defanged and shit. That was the Renaissance. Then came the Enlightenment. The other Greek philosophers were studied with excitement. Now the truth could be discovered by no other means than reason. Then shit got more divided than the South and North Koreans. A group of new philosophers, one of whom was Locke, said you can't trust your mind, but your senses and your cock know reality, so don't think too much, you little bitch. The philosophers who said this are called empiricists. On the other side of this dichotomy of mind and body, Descartes and all his niggas said your senses could be naughty. You could only trust your mind to know what is and isn't. This school of philosophy is rationalism.
It's especially this kind of thing was taken up by this kind of poor history of philosophy, this popular history of philosophy, because the guy who came up with the empiricist versus rationalist distinction was Kant,
Right?
Who was the devil.
Yeah. It's confusing. It's also the idea that Descartes was saying that you shouldn't trust your senses. It's like that, literally, like you didn't finish the book, right? Like,
I mean that's the so common online is for people to ask, well, Descartes said that we can't know anything apart from that we exist, so how do we go from there? And it's like, well, he tells you in the book.
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing is that you're doing methodological skepticism. You're, questioning.
Yeah, people think he's an actual skeptic.
Yeah, like the whole point of the book is to show why, in fact, why and how and what extent you actually can trust your senses, and you can, should believe in the external world, and for that matter, God and the immortal soul, and so yeah, just saying that. Okay, that actually really hurts. Just as somebody who has spent a lot of time going over this with interest students.
It's
very hurts.
Common.
Also, philosophy aside, just on an aesthetic level, that thing that he was doing just now, where he kept ending verses with "and shit," just seemed really lazy.
Yeah, and I mean, he's completely offbeat, wrong number of syllables. Like the beat is the most basic thing in the world. Maybe Plato was right, and we should have banned music.
It's when philosophy became a shitstorm. Scientists no longer thought philosophy was for them. It didn't help philosophy to spare itself the damage. When Rousseau is talking about how true nobility is savage. Philosophers of body versus philosophers of mind. All misguided, but the truth is that the truth they tried to find. See, they all respected reason. They each wanted to have it. Then Kant said, reason? Reason is a faggot. He modernized Plato's world of forms from
that is what
causing
Kant
reason and reality itself to go to war. He tried to fix the mind-body split, but only made it bigger. Cause reality requires you to reason, my nigga. Now that reality and reason were divorced, everyone had to pick one and fuck whatever cost. Trying to understand the world became a fucking headache. Hegel said reality and logic are synthetic. Marx pushed reason even farther away. In fact, he said reality depends on closer to a factory. If philosophy ended the age of darkness, it was now laying the blueprints for retarded shit. Nietzsche loved power.
Wait, Marx said what now?
That reality depended on how close you were to a factory.
Yeah, it's definitely remember Marx said that.
I mean, the Kant said reason is
Yes.
a word I can't. I mean, I guess. I mean, I don't know why I say I can't say it as if it isn't already in our YouTube video being said.
Yeah. No.
But anyway, there's no need to say it again. But that is pure kind of online randinism.
Yeah, that is definitely what Kant said about reason. That's right. Famously. Yeah. That. So sorry, I'm still thinking. Like, all right, so
can we see that really terrible graphic he had for Marx?
People found out like when.
I'm wondering what
like the Enlightenment, the scientific revolution, and everything all happened because the medievals found out about Aristotle. If if Aristotle's writings had been lost, presumably none of that would have happened. And also, don't think too hard about the timeline of all of this. But Marx said reality depends on how close you are to a factory. That what?
Yeah, I don't even really know what it means. This is the one where I'm like, yeah, I'm not really sure.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the idea is that he thinks that Marx is like a relativist who...
He's like a lived experience, this guy.
Yeah, it's... I don't... Okay, well, whatever. However much of Descartes he read less Marx.
I'm sure this video involved no reading. Oop.
Darkness, it was now laying the blueprints for retarded shit. Nietzsche loved power and strength, but it's not reaching or a stretch saying he inspired Nazis. Superman, something that Nietzsche gave us. Too bad he saw people as masters and slaves. Who are free now in America? Land of Thomas Paine, who brought over the Enlightenment from Europe. He explained the right of man is to be free, cause that's his fucking nature. When the Germans came, no one saw the fucking danger. Royce and his boys turned to Hegel for the basics. Dewey said your mind doesn't learn shit, it creates it. Students went to Germany, brought you back and spread it, which is why today's smartest, most retarded shit on Reddit. No reason to reason now that nothing could be known. Pragmatism said take action and follow your emotion. Kids trained to have coherence of a mental patient. This was the birth of progressive education. Integration no longer required. Postmodernism said that your mind could retire. Religion made a comeback. Tribalism too. Cause without reason, there's just feelings and the group. Without philosophy, scientists can't resist Oriental mystics claiming their shit is legit. Recycled anti-rationals repeating the same motion. Alleged men of science invoking their emotions. John Rawls said we all should be the same. Social justice is morality. Philosophy became a game of bullshit and semantics that no one understands and nobody gives a fuck about. Except for Ayn Rand, the last of the Enlightenment. She tied mind and body and reality to reason, which is great, except nobody intellectual would give a fuck. Professors wouldn't budge. They must have their reasons, but history will judge.
History will judge.
Yeah, that was so much going on in those last couple of minutes.
This bit was especially funny because it's obviously probably not true on other people's end, but I imagine it's relatively high up there. If you type his thing into Google with lyrics, the name and then lyrics, the second result for me anyway was me saying the video was bad on Reddit.
Yeah, that's that was really something. I liked this is so I'm just so confused about so much of this.
Are you ready to have history judge you for not liking
I
your
guess.
brand?
Yeah.
You like the bit where postmodernism is due to people bringing Kant to America, which only happened in 1950, seemingly.
I guess that was
the first transatlantic contact.
To be fair, people bring Kant to America, therefore postmodernism is a much shorter time scale than Aquinas found out about Aristotle, therefore the scientific revolution.
Yeah. True.
So, if we're grading by a curve of other claims made in this video, I guess that one is basically okay. Also curious how much of Tom Paine's politics guy knows about. Read your Harvey J.K.
He was a freedom guy. Believed in freedom, Ben. Freedom.
Yeah. Yes. Yep.
He liked guns and big trucks and hamburgers.
Yeah. And also one of the earliest advocates of something like a welfare state. But yeah, that's this is amazing.
I love this. It just shows a child. Then it's like progressive education. And then he's dead.
Oh
God.
Awesome. Postmodernism said your mind could retire, claiming this shit is legit.
Oh, it had the triggered woman.
Oh yeah, right. I didn't even remember there was so much that just went by there. Okay, social justice is morality.
Is this the Khmer Rouge? I think he's showing an image of the Cambodian genocide.
Yeah. Which came about because people thought that social justice was morality.
It's because they were Kantians, Ben.
Yeah. Awesome.
Stunning and brave.
Oh yeah, John Rawls.
Yeah, John Rawls bit.
I totally forgot about that. Yeah, John Rawls does not say that everybody should be otherwise. Like, John Rawls thinks that economic distribution, it's good for it to be egalitarian, except when we need it not to be for the sake of incentives, but also makes a big deal of saying that like justice, shouldn't like be so all encompassing. It doesn't leave room for people to pursue their own individual life plans. Which is like actually maybe just worth taking a beat on, since this is the basic thing.
How many views do you think this video has?
A trillion? How many?
I think 2.4 million. Yeah, 2.4 million. The shocking thing is that it was made in 2018 and not like a decade earlier.
Yeah. But this is the thing.
We can watch Plato versus Aristotle rap battle.
I'm good. This is the thing that like Rand herself did, and she trained all of her followers to do to this day, which is that the entire previous history of philosophy has to be like, it's not just that like she doesn't understand very much about like what Kant or whoever said, and like she gets a lot of stuff wrong, although that's also true. It's that the entire history of like moral philosophy, other than her and Aristotle, has to be people being altruists in a sense that like basically nobody actually is. That only other people's interests count, and you're just sort of not allowed to live your life at all, and you're supposed to be 100% self-sacrificing all the time, and anything that's done out of self-sacrifice is noble, and anything that's done for you is evil, and it's like there are maybe some strains of some religious traditions that come somewhere close to there, although even there, right, there's generally a sort of belief in that like it's good to develop your God-given talents and all of that, but as far as like secular moral philosophy, absolutely nothing bears any sort of relationship to this at all, right? Like nobody says anything like that. But it has to be because you start to like find out what somebody like Rawls actually thinks, And you might be like, oh, okay, well, that actually does seem like a reasonable way of balancing my interests with everybody else's interests. So it's much the virtue of selfishness stuff goes down much easier if the only options are that or some sort of like absolutely ridiculous super altruist straw man.
Yeah, I mean, it was funny in this video, clearly portrayed everyone that isn't Aristotle and Ayn Rand as not just kind of wrong, but like actively retrograding human progress in such a constant way that it's unclear how we ever got anywhere.
Yeah, right. Because especially because it's like, well, hold on, does there the connection that fascinates me most here is the Aristotle, therefore like science and and modernity part.
Oop, Ben is lagging out.
Yeah, to take this figure that the medievals were obsessed with.
You're lagging.
Well, maybe we should take this as a moment to end the video.
To end. Rip. Brennan's frozen. All is death. Let me look for the outro.
Oh, yeah I was going to say this is probably a good time to
Hello?
end while we still have a connection.
Yeah. Okay. Bye, everyone.